I'm going to ascribe to most people a certain desire to do good. Okay, that may be foolhardy, right? I think intention. I think most folks, would-be leaders or leaders, have good intention. The micromanager has good intention. It's misdirected. Okay, but they want to be sure that a good product is reached, that, hey, we're working on this thing and we're going to achieve this goal. And so they invest the energy in the wrong place. But the intention is that, hey, we're trying to achieve this and I'm doing the best that I know how to do. So I think their intentions are there. Up to those people who are leading at the highest levels, and by highest levels, I mean the most effective levels, not necessarily, you're, at some really high station, but who are the most effective leaders. Clearly they're intentional, just like we were just saying, right? That leadership is this thing that you keep doing, you keep learning, you keep growing. You got to keep repeating these things. That takes intention. That takes every day waking up and going, okay, today I'm going to do this thing. And I'm going to do it better than I did yesterday. And so I would say that as I look at folks, again, probably glass half full. I think I would say it's intention.
Have you ever wondered about the science behind leadership? Well, you're listening to the right episode because that is the topic of the day. My guest is Tom Collins, MD. In addition to his day job, in inverted commas, which is itself quite interesting, and we'll be hearing about that too today, he spent a large part of his career interested, passionate, studying academically the field of leadership, and more specifically, the science behind that. As a result of that study, he's in the process of writing a book when we speak today, which, if all goes well, will be released in the summer this year. The book is about the 4 stars of leadership. And given that title, it's no coincidence that he's built it on the back of his conversations with very senior military officers from the US at 4-star levels, so generals and admirals. So we'll be talking about all of Tom's career experiences today. We'll be hearing about what went into the book, the science behind leadership, the findings, the surprises, the discoveries that he's come across as a result of that. We'll also be talking about how you can apply those to your own leadership, the mistakes, the pitfalls to avoid, things like micromanagement, what you can do to build a great culture in your team, to empower and offer autonomy to your people, and why trust is at the center of all of these things. So it's an enjoyable conversation. We almost veer into politics, but take my word for it, we do avoid it at the end. And I hope that you'll get plenty from this episode. I know there's loads in here to learn, and there's some practical tips and advice for you as well. So without further ado, I will welcome Tom onto the show.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Tom, welcome to Leading with Integrity. Great to have you on the show today. Really looking forward to this conversation and getting into the science of leadership with you and much more besides, I'm sure.
Yeah, David, great to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, we appreciate you being here as well. Thanks for turning up. Yeah, so to start us off then, over to you. Tell the listeners a bit about yourself, your background, your career so far, and why you do what you do.
Yeah, well, thanks. So I'm a pediatric cardiologist, which means I'm somebody who takes care of children and adults, but children mostly who were born with abnormal hearts, and especially those who have syndromes of various types and arterial abnormalities. So that's my kind of typical job. But then several years ago, really kind of started looking at how can I be a better leader and develop myself and my capabilities in that domain, because people had identified me as somebody who most likely would move up in the hierarchy of academic medicine and leading in that. And I wanted to be, if I was going to be doing that, I wanted to be really, really good at it. So I started dedicating a lot of energy to that. And in 2020, perfect timing, I started a master's in leadership because I thought, I had read a lot of books up to that point on leadership, and I thought, I have an idea of this domain and the material, but I'm probably missing things. There are probably things I don't recognize that I don't know. And so I undertook this master's, and that was really valuable to me, helped me to have a more rigorous framework for how to think about leadership, and to, as a structure to hang ideas on, if you want to think of it that way, like a skeleton or a Hulk tree or something. And I got ideas because I do medical research. I got ideas for leadership research during that and started doing studies on that. And then that precipitated the really big study that I worked on for 2.5 years and is culminating in a book that I'm doing right now, editing, where I interviewed 51 4-star generals and admirals on their perspectives of leadership and synthesized all that and then put it into a book, the first of what will probably be many books. And from that, then I got this idea of, hey, I've done all this work. People are interested in the work. Let's start a podcast about leadership. And I wanted to look at leadership with a little bit different flavor. A lot of leadership-based shows will be, hey, here's this person and they have one idea, or, it's, oh, well, I ran some company and, and here's how I did it, or whatever, it's sort of anecdotal, one-sided thing. And I wanted to come at it more as I am as a scientist and practitioner. So bring both the art and science of it, but really highlight the science to say, here's this idea. We're talking about integrity, right? Okay, well, what is integrity? What does it look like? Why is integrity important in leadership? What does the science say? What are the studies that have been done that allow us to really see how integrity plays into successful leadership? And we wrap that all in stories, and so that's how I got to the podcast that I do, and gives you an idea, I think, of kind of how I've come along. But ultimately, the real point for me with regard to why bother with this idea of leadership is because if, as a physician, I may impact 5,000 patients personally in my career, one-on-one. With my research that I've done in medicine, that extends to kids across the globe. I interact with some families in the UK and other places because of my expertise. And that's really great. But if I want to make the biggest impact, have the best effect on humanity, I can't think of a better space to be doing it than leadership, because it affects every single human activity. And so I'm all about helping people do great things. It's about helping other folks be better. And so that's my avenue for doing it.
Yeah, I think that's the great thing about leadership, isn't it? Is that potential for like exponential impact, because it's not just you. It's not even just like the people you lead. It's the people they lead, and then so on and so on. It's like I make a painful analogy to like trickle down economics, except it works.
Right. Sure.
But yeah, no, and that's a lot of why I love it as well. So there's plenty in there that already that's really interesting, and we can probably talk about it for the whole episode. But there's a few things that I'll pick out to start with. First of all, I think your approach and your podcast and that whole science behind leadership thing is really interesting to me, because you're right, and I'm sure this show has done exactly what you've said as well. But anyway, it's because of the nature of leadership and the core of it is about that interaction between people. It can be quite subjective as well. So I find it really intriguing taking that scientific approach, and I've attempted it at a smaller scale myself, taking that scientific method approach to it as well. But I'd love to know from your perspective and from the research you've done, what were the most surprising things that came out of that when taking that sort of objective look at it?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that comes out of it, because when I was at Stanford, I did a study on physician leaders. And when you look at the things that they talk about with regard to leadership, and you look at that framework of things that are talked about with regard to the military, they overlap. They're the same. Okay. And most people would find that striking. They would say, well, leadership in the military is different than leadership in medicine or in business or whatever. And that's actually not true, because fundamentally leadership is about helping other people, working with other people to achieve a common goal. That's what it's about. How do you influence people? How do you get them on board with this idea to move toward accomplishing this goal together? And people see the context and they think that it's different, right? In the military, where it's command and control, and that's actually not true except for very specific situations. In medicine, people are running loose and all this sort of stuff, and that's actually not true either. There's hierarchy. I mean, medicine, especially academic medicine where I am, is about as hierarchical as you will find of institutions. And so every place where you look, fundamentally leadership is about that simple interaction between humans. And how do you do that well? And so I think that's probably the biggest idea about leadership that's borne out in the work that I've done and the work that others have done, in the space of looking at leadership across really this idea of studying leadership as a discipline kind of really began in earnest probably in the 1920s, 1930s. So it's only about 100 years or so of studying it. But if you look across the studies, that's what it'll show you.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you're right in terms of like the perceptions of military versus the medical field. What strikes me though is the commonality maybe between those two, on the face of it, quite different professions, is there's lives on the line there, aren't there? That's the key part, I think, that they both have in common. And so with that in mind, it's really interesting, isn't it? The commonalities and approaches to leadership. And I've heard very similar things. I haven't spoken to a lot of medical professionals, but quite a few veterans over the years, and worked with a couple. And I've heard exactly the same as you've just said. Like, there's the perception that it's very top down, very authoritarian, but actually, except for very limited circumstances, that's broadly not the case at all. And actually, in a lot of militaries, I mean, certainly in the British forces, and I hear the same about the US as well, most of the time, it's a pretty flexible structure in terms of idea generation, innovation even, interpersonal relationships between people of different ranks are a lot kind of more relaxed than we might expect for those of us who've never served.
Yeah, certainly. That having been in the military in the past, that was my experience, certainly. I think that's part. What people need to understand is that in the military, it's not about what somebody's rank is. That's not why you take, a hill or enact an order or whatever. It's about the relationship you have with your leader and the people at your right and your left. And so that requires getting to know people and trusting them and seeing that they're people of integrity and honor, character, and that they know what they're doing and they actually care about you as a human. So there's so much more to it than that moment that Hollywood plays out on a movie, right? Where it's just like, do this thing when all the bullets are flying and all that. They never show you, or rarely do they show you, the years that led up to that moment of building up the relationship that would allow me, if I'm your commanding officer, to say, David, there's a risk to your life here, but I need you to do this thing, right? Because it's really important what we're trying to accomplish as a team, that you'd be willing to go, okay, I'll do that.
And by contrast, I mean, you've mentioned Hollywood. So talking about the medical field then, I mean, there's plenty of medical dramas on TV, aren't there? And the way they project like the maverick doctor who will just, forget what the rules say, I'm going to prescribe this and that, and it's all of this sort of nonsense. And you feel like, I hope that's not the way it works in real life, but...
Yeah. I mean, I remember, there was a show here in the U.S. called ER, right? And that was actually where George Clooney really took off, was in that show. And during my training and so forth, I spent time in the ER a lot. And basically what I spent time in one of the busiest trauma centers in the United States, okay, during my training. And the amount of stuff that happened on the TV show ER in a given period of time, 1 hour or whatever it was, would be like a week's worth of stuff, right? Like they would just take all this stuff and they would cram it into this 1 hour, because that's just not the way it really works, and that's good because we don't want a whole bunch of people just flooding trauma centers all the time. But yeah, it's really not what it appears to be most of the time. Now, are the things that they talk about real? Do people have relationships that they shouldn't? Yes, sometimes. Do people make decisions that are questionable? Yes, because doctors are humans too. But it's not like it appears on TV most of the time.
Yeah, I think that's probably true of like any job that's ever been on TV or in the movies,
Sure.
isn't it? Like, because they have to make it more exciting, I suppose, because otherwise no one will watch it.
Right.
Yeah, it is interesting. We did get ER here as well. I'd forgotten about George Clooney though. For me, it was Goose from Top Gun.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was why I was watching it. Interesting. So I think you've probably already answered this, but I was going to ask you what inspired you to do that research with 4 stars as well. Like, I'm guessing it's the military connection. But
yeah. So it was during that time when I was in the midst of my master's degree, and I had read hundreds of books. Probably by that point, I had read around 200 books on leadership, and I thought, what would be the book that I would want to read? Like, what would be the best leadership book that I could imagine? And it was a leadership book that took the wisdom of 4-star generals and boiled that down into these concepts that you could understand and carry with you, and provided their stories of what that looked like. Like, that would be the coolest book, right? Like, it would be sort of a Swiss Army knife of leadership books, right? Because truth be told, if you read most of the leadership, quote unquote, leadership books on the market, it's sort of one person's view on one idea. Most of the time it's a single idea. Hey, if you figure out why you exist, your company is going to be the best company in history, right? Or if you do this one thing, it will change everything. And that's nonsense. Like, humans are way too complex for one single thing to work. Now, is that one single thing valuable and important? Probably. But also, I guess if you put all your information out in one single book, then you may not have other books to come, and you can't be a rich author or something. I don't know. I didn't do it to get rich, but I did it to write the book that I think needs to exist. And so that's what I did. I set out to write that book because I have the experience in research. I have the capability to write. I came up with the idea. I felt like it was incumbent on me to actually follow through and complete it.
Yeah, I think you're pretty on the money there about the motivation for a lot of these books. sadly. But I could think of a few authors actually where there's a whole chain of those books on there. But anyway, let's not mention names. Don't want to get sued. But also, I mean, I applaud that approach. I think that if you're going to write something, if you're going to take that time and effort and energy and put it into a book, make sure it's the one that you believe needs to be written. Otherwise, like, just what's the point?
Yeah.
Money's not everything, is it? Like,
right. No.
It's got to be meaningful, I think.
Yeah.
What would you say then? And we've talked a little bit about this already, but what are the key principles that military type of leadership has to offer, and how can that translate to building better teams, say in the medical field where you've worked, or in any team really?
Yeah. So when I took all this information, about 300,000 words from all these folks, and analyzed it painstakingly over months and months, there were 4 big areas that came out, 4 big concepts, and then about 160 that filtered into those different concepts. But I call them the 4 stars. That's going to be the book that I've been working on, the 4 stars of leadership, and they all start with C: character, competence, caring, and communication. You got to have all 4 of those if you're going to be exceptional. Character is foundational. You don't trust people that have a lack of character, right? So what is character? It's virtues. Integrity is one of them. Honor, courage, compassion. There are a host of these virtues that are imperative if you're going to be a successful leader over time. This is some, and again, when we talk about leaders in this context, we're talking about people that somebody would willingly follow, as opposed to coercion, force, those sorts of things, right? So to some degree, I include a moral and ethical dimension to leadership, which some people don't. That James McGregor Burns wrote his treatise that really described transformational leadership and published that in 1978. And that really started this idea of an ethical underpinning of leadership. So usually I think of leadership that way. But anyway, so character, you got to have that foundational. Competence, right? Like, who wants to follow an idiot? Nobody wants to follow somebody who doesn't know what they're doing, especially in a military context, or especially when you're taking care of patients who might die, or especially when your company could go under because they, right? Like any domain, you have to feel like this person knows what they're doing. Otherwise, why would you invest your interest, your future in what they're trying to get you to do? So competence is important. Caring, which would probably, again, for those who aren't really familiar with the military, they would say, caring? How does that fit in a military context? But again, it's about knowing your people, developing that relationship so that they trust you, that when you say, we need to do X, you're willing to do X because you know that they actually care about you as a person and that you're not just some number or whatever. And finally is communication. And you can be the best, you can have the best character, the most competence, you can care about everybody, but if you can't get your message across to them, it doesn't matter. You're not going to be able to lead them, right? I often will use the example of somebody who may be speaking the most beautiful, let's say, Hindi, okay? But if you're speaking the most beautiful Hindi to somebody in El Salvador, a group of people in El Salvador, you're probably not going to be terribly effective, in conveying your message and getting them to move toward that common goal together. So those 4 things are, the things that come out when we look at it, and they hold across. Again, I did this study at Stanford. Those 4 things came out exactly like they did in the military leaders. I think if you look across pretty much any domain, I challenge anybody to find a place where those 4 things aren't valuable.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that. It's interesting. I think this maybe adds credence to both of our leadership approaches, actually, because leading with integrity, weirdly, is also all about 5 C's of leadership. So the 4 are almost identical. The one that I find sometimes most controversial with people is that caring element. It's a tough one. I think it's essential. If you're going to lead, you have to care about the people you're working with that you're leading. The military example is important and useful as an example, because it's that, especially when you're asking people to do things that extreme where, you know, their lives are on the line. If they don't feel you care about them, they're not going to trust that the thing is important enough that they're going to go and do that. And I think that does apply on a far smaller and lower stake scale in any team, doesn't it? So, I mean, the classic one is, I need you to do overtime, or I need you to work the weekend at a day's notice or something. It's like, well, why? You don't care about me, so why should I trust that this is important enough that I should do that for you?
Right.
It's that relationship, isn't it? And then you also hear quite a lot of these, let's call them traditional leaders, traditional managers maybe would be a fairer way of saying it.
Yeah.
Who they very much take this mindset. And I've had people say this to me. It's like, well, it's not my job to care. And you're like, okay, well, what is your job then?
Right, exactly.
Why should anyone do what you want them to do? Like, how is this team going to produce the outputs that you as the manager or leader need it to produce if you don't care enough to take that interest and build that relationship? Anyway, don't want to go on the soapbox, but
well, I'll say, you hit on something there that I think is important. And I did a study on this too, and published a paper on it. Management and leadership are distinctly different, right? And we have a lot of people in administrative roles and leadership roles who aren't leaders, because they're thinking just like you are. Hey, we're here to make the bottom line, or whatever it may be. Whereas if they had a leader mentality and approach, the bottom line will be achieved, because you will tap into the energies of all those people that are being withheld now because you're not somebody they actually want to help out.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a fundamental question, I think, for anyone who wants to be effective at leadership. If you don't know the answer to the question, why should anyone follow me? Then, you're in trouble straight away. And going back to some of the other things you were saying just now, so that ethical and morality component, and the coercion and that other, the opposite of those, I guess, the sort of the bullying people into it. That's not leadership. You're not leading. If you have to, I mean, there's that famous quote, isn't there, from Eisenhower about, if you have to beat someone around the head to get them to do what you want, that's not leadership.
Yeah.
Right? And it's exactly, that's where we're sitting, I think, in this bit of the conversation anyway. You can't call yourself a leader if that's the only way you can get someone to do what you need them to do.
Right.
I think that's the key point. Versus, and I think that's why that ethical and morality component is so important in modern leadership, in our understanding of what it means to lead. Because without that, then we're saying that the bullying and coercive approach is leadership, and it's not. But also it means you can classify all sorts of quite horrible people over the course of history as great leaders by that definition, if you remove the ethical component from it. So that's why I see it as so important.
Yeah, I agree with you. So leading, when we think about just the act of leading historically, I'm in Lexington, Kentucky, which is the horse capital of the world, right? The quarter horse, racehorse capital of the world. And when you think about a horse, you don't lead it from behind. You lead it from ahead, right? You're out front, and the horse is following you. If you're having to whip something, you're not whipping it from the front. You're behind it, making it go, right? And so fundamentally, that's a disconnect between what leadership is and what this other thing is. This force and coercion, demand, those sorts of things. That's not leadership. You may be effective to achieve this small thing in this moment, but it will not last. and leadership carries legacy, with some baked in value to it, right? Some moral, ethical thing, that there's legacy to it. Because, and this is where leadership scientists, they get all into this discussion of, well, was Hitler a good leader and that sort of thing. And again, if you ascribe some moral component to it, the answer is obviously no. But there are people that would say, and I don't agree with them, but there are people that would say that he was, because he got all these people to do what he wanted them to do. But I don't think that was leadership.
No, I don't either. I'm with you. I think, yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? Because history blurs things. The one I hear quite a lot is when authenticity comes up, and people are like, well, Hitler was really authentic. He never hid what his intentions were. Everyone knew. So, but you're right. I think even with authentic leadership, that's a field in its own right these days, isn't it? But even within that, there's still the ethical and the morality. That is a component of that approach to leading. So again, there's that counter to it. Yeah, I don't know why Hitler comes up so much. He's on people's minds a lot more than he should be, quite frankly, given how long ago that was.
Yeah,
maybe it's a warning to avoid, but otherwise, just set him aside, guys.
Yeah, I think it was such an egregious thing, and we are, as humans, we're terrible about learning from the past. And so I think, like in Germany, they are very much about, don't forget this. Let's don't do that again, right? So I think it's this, hey, let's don't go back to that place, because it's amazing how many, and you see this in medicine, in other domains, I'm sure, but you see this in medicine all the time, where an idea has been tried and it failed. And then people forget about it. And then down the road, somebody will come along and be like, oh, I got this great idea. And it's like, yeah, they tried it like 30 years ago and didn't work. No, but it'll work this time because I thought of it, right? I think the same thing happens with organizations and governments and nations and that sort of thing, is that if we don't recall that, hey, that happened with Caligula or, Genghis Khan or whoever it may be, right? Pol Pot or whomever, then we will repeat it.
Yeah, it is a worry. I'm trying really hard to walk the line of politics at the moment, given some current events the week we're recording this.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I think we probably, David, you and I probably have the same perspective on some of the current events, I imagine.
Potentially, yeah. It's always difficult looking at it from outside when it's, I was going to say it's not going to have an effect. I think it probably will. But anyway, we're going to avoid that subject today, I think.
Sure.
But I think, the point about remembering the lessons from history, there's history, but then there's even like the recent past. And I think, yeah, you're so right. Organizations are really bad at that as well. And I think part of that is because it tends to be different people by the time that idea comes around again. And so you can say, well, it's, as you say, it's because I thought of it this time, or it's
right,
because that person or that group, they were involved last time and they are why it didn't work, but this time it'll be different. And it's very easy to rationalize it, isn't it? But for me, the phrase or the quote that always rings in my head is Einstein, I think it was, about the definition of insanity is you just do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. And so, you've got to change some factor in there if you want a different result, whatever it may be. Yeah, it's a funny one. It is a funny one. We'll avoid the social commentary, though.
Yeah. Yeah. That's something I express comment on in my podcast, is like, we steer clear of politics and that sort of stuff. And it can be hard, but we're able to walk that line.
Yeah, it is difficult. Sometimes I fall into it and we talk about it, but I think the reason I don't want to get really hung up on it is because it's so divisive at the moment. And as soon as you mention a perspective that's not the one of someone else, they switch off.
Right.
Now, I'm not super worried about listener rates or anything like that, but I do think when that happens, the lesson or the thing we can learn from it is lost, and it becomes just about a political point of view, which is a shame. Because if you're talking about leadership, what are the most obvious examples of leaders in our society that everyone knows something about? It's the flipping politicians, isn't it?
Right, right. Which again gets to this differentiation that we talked about earlier, right? People in leadership roles versus leaders.
Absolutely. And there's fertile ground for conversation there in politics as well, unfortunately, isn't there? But anyway, yeah. Yeah, I mean, in both our countries, I think. Anyway, so let's bring us back on track to the topic of the day. Anyway, maybe we'll have a conversation about that another day. But so, what advice would you give to that aspiring leader or the recently promoted who really wants to be able to enable their team, empower them, give them that autonomy to basically to take ownership of the problems, but they don't want to fall too far on the other side and become that much hated micromanager that probably everyone has worked for at least once?
Yeah. I think fundamental of that is there are two things. The first is trust that your people can get the thing done, that you believe in them. When you demonstrate, and the trust is a two-way thing, but it starts with the leader trusting the led. Okay. We have to show those we lead that we trust them, that we believe they can do the job. And micromanagers don't do that at all. And as a result, everybody's so afraid to do anything that they don't do much of anything, right? So we have to trust them. And this gets to what's known as the Pygmalion effect, which is a fascinating human phenomenon. It actually was recognized in the 1950s. I think it was 1958 when the first paper was published by one of the authors, last name Roth. And what they did, I think it was in Chicago, Illinois, in the United States. They identified these classrooms and they were randomized. Okay, so that all the kids were effectively the same with regards to intelligence and capabilities and all that. And at the beginning of the year, what they told the teachers was, some of the teachers, hey, you've got a group of geniuses. Okay, your kids are really bright. And then they told some of them, your kids are average or what have you. And they were the same. Nobody was geniuses versus the other. They were all equal. But then subsequently, a year later, when they did tests, the group of geniuses scored much higher and initially all their scores were the same. But after a year, they were much higher. And it was because the teachers believed that those kids were special. They believed that they were geniuses, and they treated them like it, and the kids responded like it. And so what happens with us is, however we treat somebody, they live up to that. Whether we treat them poorly or we treat them as geniuses, they live up to our expectations. This is something that Goethe, the German philosopher and theologian, he framed it brilliantly. He said, treat people, I'm going to use the plural so that there's no gender inequity here, but treat people as they are, and that they will remain. Treat them as they can be, and that they will become. And so if you want to get the most out of your people, you've got to believe in them and demonstrate to them that you believe in them, that they can do great things. And when you do that, they'll live up to it. So that's the first component of this idea. The second component is, when you spend all your time doing everybody else's job, you're not leading. You're not doing the job that you're actually supposed to be doing, right? And so you're not going to be successful if you're trying to do everybody else's job, micromanaging them. That's just not going to happen. So those are the two, I think, fundamental key things for people at any level, whether they're just now starting, because certainly we see that in people who've been in the role for a long time. They don't understand these two concepts. But those are vital.
Yeah, I think it's an odd parallel, isn't it, between like the really experienced leaders who do this and the new ones. Like in the new ones, it makes sense because you've not got the experience leading, so you don't know any other way of doing it, and you've just recently been doing the job of something yourself, so you're used to doing it yourself, and so
Right.
that you kind of default to that because it's easy when something's difficult. I think at the other end of that scale, I think then it becomes much more about that loss of trust. They've just got so far along in their career and they just don't, and we've all heard it, I'm sure, I don't trust anyone else to do this right unless I'm, standing over their shoulder and making sure it's done the way I want it done. And it's exhausting doing that though. Like, apart from anything else, like for the welfare of that individual leader, just stop it. You're stressing yourself out apart from anything else.
Yeah.
And it's just not necessary. And if it is necessary, is that about maybe you don't have the right person in that role? Like, or is it your own issue? Look in the mirror. It's sometimes it could be both. Sometimes it could be either or. But I don't know. I don't understand why anyone would want to micromanage to that level. It's just not worth it. And maybe most people doing it don't want to do it. They just feel they have to do it. Yeah, I mean, that's a separate concern, I suppose. But yeah, it's just
there's
bad.
so many people who do, though. There's so many people.
Every workplace has one, I think. I'm convinced. I've never worked anywhere that didn't have one, apart from now, and I'm the only one here. So technically I'm micromanaging myself, I suppose, but it frustrates me when I see it happening, I have to say.
Yeah. It's inefficient.
It is. And yeah, maybe related question, because I think one of the best ways out of this is having an example of leadership to mentor you, to guide you, something to aspire to follow when you're in that situation. So what role has mentorship played for you in your own leadership journey, and how would you recommend others find the right mentor for them?
Yeah. First, let me say I'm all about mentoring because I think it has been fundamental in my career, my trajectory, my life. So I advocate for it 100%. One of the things that I do in my role, in my academic role, is I created a mentoring program for our faculty so that everybody has the opportunity to have a mentor. And then bringing from my study, and again, these are people at the highest levels who've trained for 36 plus years to be 4-star generals and admirals, and they all said, you got to have a mentor. You got to have somebody that you can turn to who's been there before, right? Because that's fundamental in your continued growth and development. You don't stop. If you're a leader, you will be a lifelong learner. You will be continuously trying to improve. And so a key to that is having a mentor. When I look back across my life, not just my career, but the person that I think about usually the most is somebody named Rick Loudon, and he brought me along and he helped me when I was in high school with a project. And he worked at what's called Oak Ridge National Laboratory, which was close to where I grew up, and so I was able then to get a summer job in his lab during the summers between, in college. And I remember, like, I didn't know anything, right? Like I'm just in college getting started. And he was like, hey, we need to accomplish this thing. And he went in, he showed me like the fundamentals of how to do this procedure or whatever. And then he left it to me. He said, hey, it'd be great if you could produce X number of these things in this certain kind of time. And then I was free to roam, and I figured out how to do it really efficiently. And I got my job done pretty quickly. And then I would roam, this is an enormous facility. Okay. It's a government facility where they do all sorts of research of all kinds, biological research, materials engineering, all sorts of stuff. And I was in the materials engineering area. And I would just wander around all these labs and go to the library and read about fascinating things, and stuff after I'd gotten my work done. And Rick was totally fine with it because I was doing so much more than he imagined was possible, because he didn't tell me exactly what to do. And he helped me to see kind of what mentoring looks like and what leadership looks like. And he believed in me, in a fundamental way that showed me I had value that I didn't recognize I had. I mean, not that I didn't think I had value, but he just added something to it. And so that's one that I look back, but I have been exceptionally blessed to have a lot of really good mentors. And I think part of that is being able to find them, identify good ones, and know how to not screw the relationship up. But that's been instrumental for me, mentoring. And so I think anybody listening, find a mentor, somebody who can help you do great things, who sees in you the potential to do great things, and then has the understanding of how to actually do that, to help you to move toward that.
Yeah, I don't know I've ever sought out a mentor, but in hindsight, there are a few people along the way who basically were. And if they hadn't been there, I don't know where my career would have gone there. Probably not where I wanted it to go.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's always great hearing that kind of experience and the benefit you gain from it. And as you were talking through that example, it just made me think back to what you were saying before about the leader has to be the first one to trust. And that's exactly what he did. And then the benefit, I think you've explained really well for him and for you ultimately. So yeah, there's definitely a good lesson there, I think.
One of my greatest mentors actually was a British physician named Martin St. John Sutton. He was at the University of Pennsylvania where I did my training in cardiology, and he was somebody. Actually, we did an episode on my podcast about mentoring and the value of mentors, and I brought him up, and his ability to make me believe, like, I have great aspirations and this sense that I should be doing something really important. But Martin was able to help me to see it in a much more concrete way. And he believed things for me that I never even imagined, and he made me, not by force, but because he could articulate it in a way that was believable. He made me believe those things too. And so I think a good mentor is able to do that. And I think, so you said you haven't really necessarily sought out. I would highly encourage anybody, no matter where you are in station in life. I mean, I still have mentors, and I teach people how to be mentors. I've created a whole system, and I write things about mentoring and that, but I still have a mentor because I think it's exceptionally valuable.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I should caveat that by saying I definitely have a couple now that I did seek out, but in the past career, and I wish I had cottoned onto that earlier, because who knows where I'd be now. Hey. Interesting. So on the subject of lessons, what would you say if you had to pick like the biggest lesson you've learned about leadership from your entire career? What do you think that would be?
I think that fundamentally and this is the biggest lessons sometimes are perhaps the simplest or the most obvious, but it really is just about human relationships and being a good human, because that's the kind of person somebody wants to follow. And so it's that simple and that hard, because it's hard to be that person. It's hard to be a person of hard, maybe not the right word. it requires intention and energy and dedication to be that person of character and competence and caring communication. It requires more than just going about it willy-nilly, and just letting it happen. And sometimes people feel like they don't have the energy to invest in doing that. But I think it's that simple. And so I would say that's the probably the biggest lesson for me in the hundreds and hundreds that I've learned. But if I were to boil it down to one thing.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. It's certainly the most important. And yeah, it is tough. You're right. And I find that quite a lot. That comes up time and again in these conversations, actually, about it's often quite a simple idea that's really, really difficult to execute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's probably because if I just take a step back and think of it kind of with an engineering framework mindset, those things that are really difficult, often we can break down into steps, bite-sized steps, right? And we can lay out a process and we say, if you do X, then you do Y, and then you do Z, and and through this process, eventually you will get to your goal of whatever it is. Whereas this other idea, be a good human, like that's not something you can just, okay, I accomplished that step, now I can forget about that. No, like it's like putting something in a backpack, right? Like, okay, here's this brick that I've got that I've learned, got to keep it with me, right? And keep carrying that and get the next one and the next one, next one. We're continuously, I think, if we're doing it right, learning, relearning, those sorts of things.
Yeah, or it's like I mean, you're right. It's the opposite of following a process, isn't it? It's not like just do one thing once and then do the next thing. It's the repetitive nature of it, the consistent behaviors. And I think a lot of people get stuck with that because we're humans, funnily enough. And so right. We have off days, we get sick, mental health is an issue as well now in most workplaces, or we just didn't sleep well last night, so we're not at the top of our game today. And so as soon as you hit that first kind of whatever that thing is for you, it's very easy to go, do you know what? I'm not going to do that thing today that I promised myself I would do to become a better leader because whatever the reason is. And then once you've stopped pedaling, it's quite difficult to get back on the bike, isn't it?
Right. Yeah.
Taking a slightly opposite perspective then, if you could pick the thing that you think most leaders do get right, because I think we've talked quite a lot about where it can go wrong and some of the behaviors to aspire to, but what do you think most leaders in most workplaces, let's just say as an average, what is it that they're getting right the most, and why does that matter?
Yeah, so this is a tough question. And I guess I'm going to ascribe to most people a certain desire to do good. Okay, that may be foolhardy, right? I think intention. I think most folks, would-be leaders or leaders, have good intention. The micromanager has good intention. It's misdirected. Okay, but they want to be sure that a good product is reached, that, hey, we're working on this thing and we're going to achieve this goal. And so they invest the energy in the wrong place. But the intention is that, hey, we're trying to achieve this and I'm doing the best that I know how to do. So I think their intentions are there. Up to those people who are leading at the highest levels, and by highest levels, I mean the most effective levels, not necessarily, oh, you're at some really high station, but who are the most effective leaders, clearly they're intentional, just like we were just saying, right? That leadership is this thing that you keep doing, you keep learning, you keep growing. You got to keep repeating these things. That takes intention. That takes every day waking up and going, okay, today I'm going to do this thing, and I'm going to do it better than I did yesterday. And so I would say that as I look at folks, again, probably glass half full. I think I would say it's intention.
Yeah, I really like that. Yeah, and I totally agree with you on the micromanagers. I think I said it earlier, but most people aren't doing that maliciously. They're doing it. I think quite a lot of them are doing it because they think it helps. Right. They haven't realised yet what potentially negative impact it's having. I do agree with you. I think I don't know whether it's optimism or I don't know, friendly realism. But I agree with you. I think we have to believe that as well, because otherwise society falls apart. We've got to believe that the majority of people have good intentions.
Right. Yeah.
And I think it's a good mindset to have as a leader as well. We were talking earlier about like coercion and trust and things like that. And I think if your default mindset as a leader is that you trust most people's intentions are good and that they want to achieve, they want the right outcome for the team, I think that makes it a lot easier to be the first one to trust.
Yeah.
I think it makes you more effective as a leader over the long term as well, because you're more likely to be the sort of person who will engage that relationship in the right way. Yeah, as opposed to the distrusting, more manager type, dare we say. I feel like I'm being quite unfair to managers sometimes when I say things like that. But
yeah, there is this tendency in society to say that leaders are great. This idea of leaders, they're great people, and managers are the sticks in the mud, if you will, the people that and that's not the case at all, because if we look at what they do, right, managers figure out how to do things right. They work to make things more efficient, to make sure that we have all the stuff we need to make the widget or whatever it is, to lower costs, to make sure everybody's doing the thing that they're supposed to be doing. If you don't have all those things happening, the likelihood of success is pretty low. So that's vitally important. And leadership is a different set of activities, capabilities, and so on. That's really important. And I think the leadership kind of business, right? Like there's a lot leadership is a business in a lot of senses, has painted this picture of leadership as the panacea that's going to fix everything. And now everybody wants to be a leader and nobody wants to be a manager. I think you can be both. You can absolutely be both. There are actually leadership and management scientists who would argue that leadership is just a part of management, or management is just a part of leadership. And I don't necessarily ascribe to that, but I think certainly you can have both in the same person, in the same group of people. And it shouldn't be either or. They're not mutually exclusive.
Absolutely. I mean, you're so right about the way we, and again, not to scapegoat Hollywood, but I do feel like popular media has a lot to answer for in this one, don't they? Like we created this like aspirational, perfect, impossible to achieve leader, and that's what leadership is perceived as now.
Yeah, everybody's got to be Gandhi or Mandela. Or somebody, right?
Or Captain America.
Right, sure.
And I don't think, and I'm by no means trying to devalue leadership, because it is essential, I think, but I think you have to be both, at least to some extent. You've got to, if you want to be in any leadership role, you've got to be at least capable or competent, or minimum level of understanding of what management and that the administration, the process, the stuff, not the people. Because if you want to be leading the people, then all of those other bits of the management role are also quite important. At least definitely in a business setting, probably in any kind of team or organizational setting as well. I don't think you can have one without the other. They are definitely different to me, though. I don't see them as the same thing or different parts of each other or whatever. But yeah, I've for quite a while now, I've been arguing that if you want to be good at either one of those, you've got to be good at both.
Or
yeah,
at least have a dyadic partner.
Yes.
Right.
Good. No, I was going to add, actually, it's a good point. It depends how big your organization is. So I come from it very much from like the small business angle. So where there's fewer people involved. If you've got the team, the resources, the size of organization, and you can afford to have that role be two different people, then great, go for it if it works.
Yeah. Yeah.
This might be another difficult question for you. We shall see. If you could start your career or your business over again, is there anything you'd do differently?
I think that, and maybe it's because I've sort of recognized it as my purpose in life is to help other people do great things. It's to, build them up. I see that as being able to do that most through leadership. I think I would have started being intentional in my leadership development and training right out of the gate as soon as I could, because I'd be so much further along. I feel like I'm, making good progress and moving in a great direction and have developed an armamentarium, if we call it that, a capability set that I would say exceeds most, but I still have so much further to go and could have been more effective earlier than I was. And so I think that's what I would say. So I would have started that earlier.
I don't want to sound cynical, but I think anyone answering that question, if they're going to be 100% honest, it's going to be a variation on that answer, isn't it? Because who wouldn't want to be able to start earlier on the thing they know is the right thing to do?
Sure. Yeah. That makes sense. I guess I could have said, I would have told myself to invest in insert extraordinarily valuable stock here, when it was.
Well, that's the classic time travel conundrum, isn't it? Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
No, but it's an honest answer and therefore a good one. So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Well, try and be honest, David.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
Leadership Heroes.
All right, well, it's that time, I'm afraid. There's only one question left. This is usually my favourite question.
All right.
Some people struggle with it. Some people have an instant answer. They don't even have to think about it. No pressure. It's called Leadership Heroes. So if you had to pick one person, but that can be anyone you like, so alive, dead, past, present, real, or even fictitious, but it's got to be someone that, in your opinion, would perfectly embody leadership. Who would that person be and why?
Yeah, that's an easy question. There are so many people that, and my tendency in that question is to think of real people. You mentioned Captain America earlier, which makes me say, should I be thinking of somebody? But I like the idea of a real person, because they did or are facing real challenges. And so I would say that it would be a real person. And then it's only a matter of looking across all of human history and determining which one would be the single person that I would choose. I would say, actually quite unequivocally, it would be Jesus of Nazareth. And that is because if you look at what he did, okay, as recorded and is passed down through history over the last 2,000-ish years, I would say that we don't have any evidence of failure of character. The character was fundamental. I can't speak to his carpentry abilities, but as far as a capability of influencing other people to achieve a common goal, that a leader, that fundamental leader competence, he was an unknown person from a little place in nowhere that gets all kinds of crap thrown on it, and a group of people who've been mistreated for essentially their entire existence. He was from that group of people, and wasn't from a very high level in that group of people. And yet he was able to bring together this group of ragtag people, convince them of this idea, and that he cared about them. He demonstrated that. And he was able to communicate these things in a way that people understood. I mean, the way that he taught groups of people in parables and things, he talked about common ideas that people understood, right? Like farming things and stonework and all this sort of stuff that common people understood. And we still use that sort of approach today, right? That communication approach. And he talked, and it was in story, because we're not made for spreadsheets and things like that. We're made for stories. Humans are. And so I think, as I look at, and now, how many people on the earth, I don't know, lots of people, look at Jesus of Nazareth. We're talking about him now. I guarantee you, David, no matter what I do, if we haven't destroyed ourselves, 2,000 years hence, nobody will know about Tom Collins or name anybody who's living right now, right? Like, unlikely that anybody will know anything about me or anyone right now. But here we are 2,000 years later, and we still talk about him. People are worshiping him. They're reading all sorts of books about him. They sing songs. Like it's hard for me to identify anybody who's, if we look at, again, those 4 C's of leadership, who's carried those out more effectively and had a longer lasting thing. Now, somebody might say, well, what about the Crusades and what about religious, wars and all that? I don't think that Jesus of Nazareth caused those. I think that was misinterpretations of people who would be followers, right? Who were hoping to try to follow, and they just didn't get what the guy was talking about. That's what my take on it would be. So anyway, that's my, as they used to say on whatever game show that was, like weakest link or something, or final answer. That's my answer.
Yeah. So it's a good answer. We've had it quite a few times, but what I like about your answer is the why part of the answer, because you've come at it from a different direction to a lot of the ones that I've had before. I think, whether you believe in him or not, there's great lessons there, and if you take it as written, as you were talking there, I was thinking in my head, like, okay, so pick a modern leadership approach. It almost doesn't matter which one you choose. At some point in that story, in that history, he was doing it. Like authentic leadership, yeah, check. Servant leadership, check. Transformational leadership, yeah, think so.
Yeah, right.
And I find that really interesting, given how long ago this was, and then everything that leadership as a field, as a practice, has done in between. And now we're starting to find our way back to actually what we've probably always known works better anyway.
Yeah.
It was just things like, selfish self-interest and economic context and, whatever the latest, at the time, modern idea, less so now, what was in fashion.
Yeah.
And I wonder how many other fields are like that as well, where we just kind of eventually, after a few wrong turns, find our way back to a fundamental way of doing something that we've probably always known was the right way of doing it.
Yeah, right. Well, that's we have such conceit or arrogance, right, that we think we discovered it, right? Like if you look at the idea of servant leadership, if you look that up anywhere, it will tell you that Robert Greenleaf is the guy who came up with that idea, first published in a little pamphlet in 1970, and then 1977 put out a little book on it, right? No, that dude was like 2,000 years late, okay, on the idea, just like you said. If we look at transformational leadership, we could even go back to about, I think it was about 520 BC, okay? Laosa in China wrote about what basically is fundamental, transformational leadership. And that he said, the leader, the great leader, when he has completed his task, achieved his aim, the people will say, we did it ourselves. They won't even know that he existed because he has convinced them that they're capable of doing something to the point that they think they did it all on their own. That's transformational leadership. Again, 2,500 years ago. And then Burns writes about it in 78, and we say he came up with the idea. But it's like you say, we think that, here's this idea. We come back to it, but most of the time we don't realize that it was there all along and that we weren't as crafty as we think.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, you don't even have to go that far back, though, even within modern history, but predating Greenleaf. Like, there's plenty of examples, I think, of leaders acting against their own self-interest in order to serve the needs of their team or their people.
Sure.
There's plenty of examples from a couple of world wars, I'm sure, in a military context. In your field as well, no doubt, there are examples. You don't have to go hundreds of years back to find people leading in medical environments, in pandemics, in great medical crises, putting their health at risk in order to help others to serve the needs of their team and so on. So you're right. I wonder, like, we're at that point of civilization where there's just no original ideas left. Maybe that's a depressing thought. I don't know.
Yeah, it is. And then you got the reality that AI is probably only going to exacerbate that.
Yeah. Well, maybe that is the last original thing we'll ever come up with now. Who knows? Yeah, it's going to be an interesting one.
That's possible.
It's going to be an interesting one, definitely. And as for what you're saying about no one's going to remember Tom Collins in 2,000 years, I'm not sure that's as true as it was 2,000 years ago. Because there's the internet now, isn't there? Everything we say, think, or do is, unless there is some like apocalypse and the internet.
Yeah, I was just thinking Mad Max,
Well, right, yeah, but short of that, I think our legacy is there regardless now, whether we want it to be or not.
Yeah, well,
maybe that's comforting though. I choose to believe it is.
Yeah, we can choose. Right, we can choose to believe positive things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, especially for podcasters. Like, it's nice to think that long after we're gone, people can still hear our voices. Yeah. Maybe bad luck for them, but it's good for us.
Certainly, as podcasters, we know the amount of effort and energy that it takes to put together something like this, and we want people to see value in it, and otherwise, I don't think we would be doing it. So, yeah, absolutely. A couple podcasters being optimistic makes sense.
Yeah, I'm with you. Great. Well, so one final question. If anyone wants to learn more about you, I'm sure everyone in the audience will. Where can they find you? Where can they find the podcast? When's the book coming out? Is there a website? Yeah, tell us all the links.
Sure. Yeah. So we have The Science of Leadership, and you can find that. We have video versions and shorts and mid-length videos that we derive from our stuff. That can be found on YouTube. And then the Science of Leadership audio version is on most all the big platforms: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, et cetera, et cetera. So you can find us there. The book, The 4 Stars of Leadership, aiming to come out summer 2025, if all goes well with the publication process, which can be full of trials and tribulations, but that's the target. And then the 4 Stars of Leadership website is www.4starleaders.com. And you can find us there, and happy to connect with everybody. Also, you can find me on LinkedIn. We do have a LinkedIn page for 4-Star Leaders, as well as Tom Collins, MD, as my sort of call sign, if you will, in LinkedIn.
Lovely. Well, I'll sprinkle a selection of those links in the show notes for everyone to find easily as well.
Yeah. Well, thanks, David.
Yeah, great conversation, Tom. Thanks for being with us. And I look forward to the book later in the year.
Yeah. Great to talk with you.
Likewise. Thank you again, Tom, for your time today. What a great conversation. I know I say it every week, but you know what? Every week it's true as well. So I'm not lying. Really enjoyed that, though. Some deep topics there covered in probably not enough detail, but sadly we do have an average episode length that I am determined to aim for this year. Listener or viewer, thank you for being with us. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you found it entertaining, useful, educational. If you would like to learn more about Tom and maybe listen to his podcast, get a copy of that book. Depending on when you're listening to this, it might not be out yet, but you can find details about all of those things in the show notes. Do click on the links, reach out to him on socials as well. Again, his LinkedIn profile is down there, so you can do that. And as he said, he'd be happy to hear from you. And if you are one of those new leaders, first-time managers, first-time company founder even, if you're in a moment of change and transition in your leadership journey, Leading with Integrity is built for you. It's here to help. First step on that process after listening to an episode of the podcast or any of the other episodes if it comes to that. We're over 160 now, so there's plenty to choose from, loads to learn. But once you've done that, if you want that next step, then come and have a go at my new leadership quiz. It will do two things for you. It will help surface some of those challenges and help you hone in on the most important one or the one you're struggling with the most. It sounds simple, but identifying the problem is often the first step. And the fun element of it is it will help you identify your leadership hero. Every week you hear me ask the guest, who is your leadership hero? You ever thought about who yours might be? There is a sci-fi theme to this quiz as well. So if that doesn't appeal, then maybe try it anyway. You never know. There should be a character in there that everyone will recognize anyway. So give the quiz a go. You'll get immediate results. It's optional to give your email address, but if you do, then you will get a follow-up with some more detailed info. It'll be a 3 or 4 page PDF giving you your full results, explaining what they mean, and giving you further steps after that if you're interested. So it's about 15 to 20 minutes, depending on how fast you read and how much you want to think about your answers. I do encourage you to put a bit of thought into it, or it won't be much use to you. It's designed to be a bit of fun. It's designed to get you thinking about your leadership in the context of your workplace, your role, your job. There are scenario-based things in there as well. And it is on my new website. You will find it at www.leadingwithintegrity.co.uk. And you can navigate to the resources page once you get there, and you'll find the quiz on that list. Any questions, reach out. You can find my LinkedIn profile in the show notes as well. So just reach out, send me a message. Let me know your questions, your feedback on the quiz as well. Love to hear what you think of it. And that's all from me today. I hope you'll join us again next week. We're veering slightly from the science of leadership today to the magic, the mysticism of life, academia, and leadership next week with my next guest, Emma Gabor. Hope you'll be with us. And until then, as always, be a leader, not a boss.